A mother lost her husband and twins on the same day, but at the funeral she saw something that no one could explain. Don't forget to subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. The morning sunlight pushed its way through the thin curtains, cutting bright lines across the kitchen floor where Joshua stood, stirring oatmeal while the kettle rattled softly on the stove. The twins, Aiden and Ellie, 12 years old and already taller than the marks Joshua had once scratched on the doorframe, darted in and out of the kitchen, one looking for a missing soccer sock, the other shouting for a notebook that seemed to disappear every morning before school. Joshua lifted the pot off the stove and poured the oatmeal into bowls, topping them with slices of banana, while the twins argued lightly over who would sit closer to the window. Outside, the branches of the oak tree danced, leaves shifting with the breeze that promised rain later in the day. He called to them to settle down, and Ellie, with her wild brown curls tied back by a yellow clip that refused to stay in place, plopped into her seat, her bright eyes landing on her father. Aiden, quieter, already had his notebook clutched under one arm, the pages bent and smudged with pencil sketches of superheroes he had been drawing for weeks, stories about characters who saved others even when no one noticed. Lauren, their mother, appeared in the doorway, one hand rubbing the sleep from her eyes, the other clutching the phone as she checked the messages she had missed overnight. She kissed Joshua on the cheek and ruffled Aiden's hair, pressing her lips softly to Ellie's forehead as she passed. Her eyes swept across the kitchen, taking in the ordinary chaos, the open lunch boxes on the counter, the half-empty cereal box left beside the sink, the faint but comforting scent of coffee brewing in the corner. For a moment, everything felt exactly as it should, a warm piece of morning before the world's sharp edges pressed in. But, as she reached for her mug, a shiver ran across her skin, like a tiny ripple of cold that made her pause, her eyes flicking to the window where the clouds had begun to gather in the far distance. She shook it off, telling herself it was just the weather. After breakfast, Joshua found himself kneeling by the front door, helping Ellie tie the laces of her muddy sneakers. She laughed when he double-knotted them too tight, pulling her foot back while she scolded him for treating her like a little kid. He grinned, reaching up to tap her nose, telling her that no matter how tall she got, she would always be his girl. Aiden stood to the side, clutching his notebook, his face unreadable, but his eyes flicking between his father and sister, a quiet smile forming as he held his superhero sketches to his chest. Lauren grabbed her bag and car keys, calling out that she would pick up groceries after work, and Ellie teased that if she didn't bring home the right snacks, she wouldn't forgive her. They laughed as the door closed behind her, the house falling into that brief morning silence that always followed when Lauren left for work, the quiet a reminder of the hours that would unfold. Joshua checked the time and urged the twins to grab their backpacks, reminding them not to forget their water bottles, which they always left behind in a rush. The drive to school was filled with the music Ellie insisted on playing, her fingers tapping to the beat while she sang along, her voice confident and off-key, filling the car with a brightness that made Joshua smile despite the gray sky that pressed down over Savannah. Aiden sat with one earbud in, half listening to the music while he continued to scribble in his notebook, drawing the new hero he had created the night before, a character who could move unseen to help those in danger, a hero Aiden claimed would save people when no one else was watching. At the school drop-off, Ellie jumped out first, waving at her friends, shouting that she would beat them in soccer during recess. Aiden stepped out more quietly, pausing to look back at Joshua, who rolled down the window to remind him to eat his lunch and not lose his notebook again. Aiden nodded, a quick flash of a smile crossing his face before he turned to follow Ellie across the parking lot. Joshua watched them until they disappeared inside the school doors, the small figures swallowed by the crowds of children streaming in, backpacks bouncing on small shoulders. It was the last time he would see them walk away like that, full of energy, unaware of the storm the world was preparing for them. The day was filled with errands for Joshua, who spent the morning repairing a chair for a neighbor, sawdust clinging to the hair on his arms, the small cuts from splinters stinging as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. He answered a call from Lauren around noon, reassuring her that he would pick up the twins from their after-school soccer practice, that she didn't need to rush home. Her voice was soft, tired from work, but lightened by the promise of seeing them for dinner. They spoke briefly about dinner plans, about maybe letting the twins choose what to watch on movie night, about how Ellie would probably demand a comedy while Aiden would pretend to argue for something serious before giving in to whatever Ellie wanted. When the afternoon clouds finally broke, rain came down in thick, heavy drops that clung to the windshield as Joshua drove toward the school. The streets shone with reflections of headlights, the roads slick and dark beneath the rain. He parked and watched as Ellie came running from the gym, her hair soaked, laughter spilling out as she splashed through a puddle, Aiden trailing behind her, shaking his head but grinning, holding his notebook under his shirt to keep it dry. They jumped into the car, water dripping onto the seats, the air filled with the scent of rain and the sharp tang of wet pavement. Ellie was the first to speak, her words a rush of stories about her day, about how she scored the winning goal in practice, how she almost slipped in the mud but caught herself, how her friend dared her to sing in the lunchroom and she did, loudly, making everyone laugh. Aiden interrupted only to correct the details, saying she almost fell and that her singing wasn't as loud as she claimed, but his eyes were bright and his smile betrayed his pride in his sister. Joshua listened, adding a few teasing comments, letting their voices fill the car as the rain tapped against the windows, the wipers pushing away the water in steady, rhythmic sweeps. Joshua glanced at the rearview mirror, watching his children as they argued playfully, their faces lit with excitement even as the sky grew darker. The road ahead curved sharply, the rain turning heavier, a sheet of water blurring the lines on the pavement. Joshua's phone buzzed on the console, Lauren's name flashing on the screen, and he reached to answer, telling her they were on their way home, promising they would be safe. She told him to drive carefully, that the roads were dangerous, her voice cracking just a little as she said she loved him. He told her he loved her too, the words hanging in the car as he ended the call, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. They were only minutes from home when it happened. The delivery truck, moving too fast on the rain-slick road, swerved into their lane, and its tires skidding as it tried to correct, its headlights blinding in the dim evening light. Joshua's heart slammed in his chest as he turned the wheel sharply, Ellie's scream cutting through the air, Aiden's hand reaching out instinctively to his sister. The world became a roar of metal and glass, the sound of impact tearing through the rain, the car flipping, the windows shattering, the cold rain pouring in as the world spun in violent, unstoppable motion. When the car finally stopped, the rain fell into the twisted metal, the air heavy with smoke and the smell of gasoline. There was silence for a moment, the kind that presses on your ears and makes the world feel like it has ended. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, growing closer, but inside the car there was nothing but the sound of rain and the slow drip of water from the roof onto the seats. Aiden's notebook lay open on the floor, a sketch of his hero smudged with water, the pencil lines bleeding into the page. Lauren received the call in the break room at her office. her coffee cup slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor, the hot liquid seeping into the cracks between the tiles. The voice on the phone was calm, professional, telling her there had been an accident, that she needed to come to the hospital. She didn't remember the drive there. Didn't remember how the lights of Savannah blurred through her tears as she sped through the streets, her mind screaming against the silence in the car. When she arrived, the lights in the emergency entrance were too bright, the floor too clean, the smell of antiseptic sharp enough to make her stomach turn. They told her there had been nothing they could do, that Joshua, Ellie, and Aiden were gone, that the impact had been too severe, that there had been no signs of life when the paramedics arrived. She saw the black bags, saw the shape of her children beneath the plastic, saw the outline of Joshua's broad shoulders that had once carried both children on each arm, their laughter echoing in the air. She wanted to scream, to tear the bags open and shake them awake, to demand that they breathe. But her body felt heavy, frozen, her hands trembling as she reached out but couldn't bring herself to touch the cold plastic. They asked her to sign the papers, 3 signatures, one for each piece of her heart that had been ripped away. She sat in the hallway outside the morgue, the cold bench pressing into her back, the sound of the clock on the wall ticking too loudly each second, a hammer striking inside her skull. The world moved around her, nurses walking past, doctors speaking in low voices, the sound of distant cries from other rooms, but for Lauren, everything was silent. The world muted by the weight of what she had lost. The day that had begun with laughter and oatmeal, with shoelaces tied too tight and songs sung off-key, ended in a silence so complete that it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. The sky outside the hospital was dark, the rain still falling, washing the streets clean while Lauren sat, the papers in her hands shaking as she tried to remember how to breathe, how to stand, how to keep living in a world where the laughter of her children and the steady voice of her husband no longer existed. When she finally left the hospital, the rain had stopped, but the world felt empty, the air cold against her skin. She drove home in the darkness, the empty seats in the car a cruel reminder, the echo of Ellie's laughter and Aiden's quiet corrections haunting every turn she took. The house was dark when she arrived, the lights off, the silence pressing against the windows, waiting for her to enter. She opened the door, stepping inside, the smell of breakfast still lingering in the air, the bowls from that morning still in the sink, the shoes by the door exactly where they had left them. She sank to the floor, clutching the yellow hair clip she found in Ellie's room, the tears finally coming as she let the weight of her loss crush her, the darkness of the house swallowing her sobs as she whispered their names into the emptiness. The morning of the funeral dawned under a low, heavy sky, gray clouds pressing down over Savannah as if the world itself mourned. Lauren moved through the house in silence, her movements careful, her hands folding clothes that would never be worn again. She laid out Aiden's navy blazer on the bed, smoothing the fabric with trembling fingers, remembering how he used to stand in front of the mirror, pulling faces to make Ellie laugh while she fixed her hair. Ellie's dress was laid out next, a pale blue one with small white flowers along the hem, the one she had insisted on wearing for her friend's birthday party, twirling in the living room until she was too dizzy to stand. Lauren pressed it to her chest for a moment before laying it down, the scent of her daughter's hair still clinging to the fabric sharp and painful in its familiarity. In the corner of the room, the twins' shoes sat side by side, scuffed and marked by the countless adventures they had taken together, from the backyard to the school field, from puddles after rain to the hard, dusty ground of the soccer pitch. Lauren picked them up, holding them in her hands, her thumb tracing the worn leather of Aiden's left shoe, the one with the small rip near the toe that he had promised to fix with glue, but never had the chance. She placed them beside the clothes, a gesture that felt both right and impossibly cruel, a preparation that no mother should ever have to make. The funeral home smelled of lilies and polished wood, the air heavy with the mingled scents of flowers and the faint tang of disinfectant that clung to the walls and floors. 3 coffins stood in the center of the viewing room, 2 smaller ones on either side of a larger one, all of them stark in their polished darkness, the brass handles gleaming under the soft lights. Lauren stood there for a long time before she could bring herself to move closer, her reflection in the polished wood a ghost she did not recognize, her face pale and drawn, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights and the endless hours of weeping that seemed to drain her of every last reserve of strength. Relatives began to arrive, their voices hushed, their movements careful, as if any sudden noise might shatter the fragile shell that surrounded Lauren. Her mother stood by her side, a constant, silent presence, her hand gripping Lauren's with a strength that belied her age, her face etched with grief that was both her own and her daughter's. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues of Joshua came, offering quiet condolences, their words blurring into a soft, meaningless hum that filled the room without truly touching Lauren. She heard them say how tragic it was, how unfair, how they couldn't imagine the pain she must feel, but their voices sounded distant, like echoes from another world, a world she no longer belonged to. The service was scheduled for midday, and as the hour approached, the room filled with the muted rustling of people shifting in their seats, the soft sounds of tissues being pulled from pockets, the occasional stifled sob breaking the stillness. Lauren stood beside the coffins, her hand resting lightly on the lid of Ellie's, tracing the delicate pattern of the carvings with her fingertips. She remembered the way Ellie used to hum to herself while brushing her hair, the way Aiden would sit quietly beside her, drawing in his notebook while waiting for breakfast, the way Joshua would kiss the top of her head as he passed by, the smell of sawdust and coffee clinging to him. As the pastor began to speak, Lauren felt herself drifting, the words washing over her without sinking in, her mind filled with flashes of memories that cut deeper than any words could. Ellie's laughter as she chased fireflies in the yard, Aiden's shy smile when he showed her his latest drawing, Joshua's tired but warm eyes as he watched over them, the way they would all collapse onto the couch together after dinner, tangled in blankets and laughter. The words of comfort felt hollow, empty phrases that could never fill the gaping wound that had torn through her life. After the service, people lined up to pay their respects, moving slowly past the coffins, some reaching out to touch the polished wood, others pausing to whisper prayers or words of farewell. Lauren stood to the side, clutching a tissue she didn't use, unable to cry any longer, her eyes dry and burning as she watched the procession of grief pass by. Some of the children's friends came, small and confused, holding the hands of their parents, their eyes wide as they tried to understand why their friends were lying so still, why everyone was so sad. Lauren's sister moved quietly through the crowd, taking photographs as she had promised, wanting to capture the day for the family members who couldn't attend, for the sake of memory, for the sake of honoring the lives lost. She moved with care, her camera clicking softly, the lens capturing the bowed heads, the trembling hands, the flowers laid carefully beside the coffins, the grief that hung in the air like a heavy fog. Lauren barely noticed her mind elsewhere, replaying the last morning, the last words, the last smiles. When the service ended, people gathered outside, the sky still heavy with clouds, the air thick and damp, the promise of rain lingering in the wind. Lauren stood alone for a moment, looking back at the 3 coffins, her heart heavy with the weight of finality, the knowledge that this was goodbye, that there would be no more mornings of laughter, no more nights of whispered stories, no more soft good nights and warm embraces. She felt the world shift beneath her feet, the ground unsteady, the future a dark, uncertain void. It was only later that the photograph was discovered. Her sister, sitting in the quiet of her living room, sorting through the images on her camera, paused when she came to a picture taken during the service. It was a simple shot, the coffins in the foreground, the mourners in the background, heads bowed, hands clasped in prayer. But as she looked closer, her breath caught, her fingers trembling as she zoomed in on the small coffin on the right, the one that held Ellie. There, in the reflection of the glass panel on the coffin, was something that should not have been there. A small hand, pressed against the glass from the inside, fingers splayed, the tips dirty with what looked like soil, the faint outline of fingernails clearly visible. It was unmistakable, undeniable, a moment frozen in time that should have been impossible. The reflection showed a hand, small and desperate, as if trying to reach out, to escape, to signal for help. Her sister called Lauren immediately, her voice shaking, words tumbling out in a rush as she tried to explain, tried to convey the horror of what she had seen. Lauren didn't understand at first, the words not making sense, her mind rejecting the possibility, the sheer impossibility of it. But when the image was sent to her phone, and she saw it with her own eyes, the world tilted, her breath catching in her throat, her vision blurring as she tried to comprehend what she was seeing. She stared at the photograph for a long time, her hands shaking, her mind screaming that it wasn't real, that it couldn't be real. But the image remained, clear and undeniable. The small hand pressed against the glass, the dirt under the nails, the desperate plea for help that seemed to echo through the silence of the house. She zoomed in, trying to find an explanation, a logical reason, something that would make sense, but there was nothing, only the reflection of her daughter's hand reaching out from within the coffin. Lauren felt a cold wave of nausea wash over her, her body trembling as she clutched the phone, the edges biting into her skin. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, the world spinning around her as the realization sank in, heavy and suffocating. She rushed to the bathroom, retching into the sink, the taste of bile sharp in her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she gasped for air. The image of the hand burned into her mind, unshakable, undeniable. She called the funeral home, her voice breaking as she demanded answers, asking how this could have happened, how it was possible. The director, his voice calm and measured, tried to reassure her, telling her it was impossible, that the reflection was just that, a trick of the light, a distortion caused by the angle of the photograph and the lighting in the room. He told her that her mind was playing tricks on her, that grief could make people see things that weren't there. But Lauren knew what she had seen. She knew the shape of her daughter's hand, the way her fingers curled, the small scar on her index finger from when she had fallen off her bike last summer. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep into her bones, that this was not an illusion, not a trick of the light, not a manifestation of grief. It was real, and it was a cry for help that had gone unheard, a plea from within the darkness that no one had seen until it was too late. When she tried to show the photograph to others, to the police, to the family, to the funeral home staff, they all dismissed it, their eyes filled with pity and discomfort, their words soft and patronizing as they tried to comfort her, to tell her she was seeing what she wanted to see, that it was her grief, her mind trying to make sense of the senseless. They told her to rest, to take care of herself, to let go and move forward, but Lauren couldn't. Not when the image of that hand haunted her every moment, every breath. She found herself standing in Ellie's room that night, the photograph clutched in her hand. The room exactly as it had been left, the bed unmade, the books scattered on the floor, the stuffed animals lined up on the shelf, waiting. She sat on the edge of the bed, the photograph resting on her lap, her fingers tracing the outline of the hand, her tears falling onto the glossy surface, smearing the image as she whispered her daughter's name into the darkness. Lauren knew that something was wrong, that something had happened, something that no one else wanted to see, to acknowledge. She felt it deep within her, a mother's instinct that could not be silenced, could not be dismissed. She knew that she could not let this go, that she had to find the truth no matter what it cost, no matter how much it hurt. She owed it to Ellie, to Aiden, to Joshua, to herself. As she sat in the darkness of the room, the photograph cold in her hands, Lauren made a promise, a vow whispered into the silence of the night, a promise that she would not stop until she found out what had happened, until she uncovered the truth, no matter how deep it was buried, no matter who tried to stop her. The photograph was not the end. It was only the beginning. Lauren could not sleep. She lay in bed with the photograph on the nightstand, the dim light of the street lamp outside pushing thin stripes across the room, touching the frame, illuminating the small hand pressed against the glass in the picture. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ellie's hand, the dirt beneath her fingernails, the silent plea caught in a moment no one wanted to see. She could hear Ellie's voice in her mind, the laughter, the complaints about too much homework, the way she would hum under her breath when brushing her hair. It was as if Ellie was trying to reach her, as if Aiden was trying to reach her, the silence of their absence louder than any sound Lauren had ever known. Morning came without rest, without the comforting warmth of children's voices filling the kitchen, without the shuffle of small feet across the wooden floors, without the arguments over who got to sit by the window. The house was too quiet, each room a hollow reminder of what had been lost. Lauren moved through the spaces like a ghost, her hand trailing over the surfaces they had once touched, her fingers brushing against Aiden's notebook still left on the couch, pages filled with sketches of superheroes with hopeful eyes, brave smiles, and capes that could not save him. She found herself standing by the hallway closet, where she had placed the shoes to prepare them for burial, remembering how she had paired them together, thinking it was the last act of care she could give them. Something pulled her to open the door, to kneel down and touch the shoes once more, to trace the laces with her fingers. Her eyes fell on Aiden's left shoe, the small tear near the toe still there, and for a moment she pressed it to her chest, closing her eyes, letting the memory of his small hands tying the laces, always in a rush, flood over her. As she placed the shoe down, something caught her attention. A faint mark on the side of the shoe, a streak of fresh dirt, not the dried mud from old playground days, but damp, dark soil that smudged her fingers when she touched it. Her heart began to pound, her breath catching as she examined it more closely. She checked the shoes again, finding small clumps of dirt near the soles, fresh enough to stain her fingertips, impossible to ignore. She stood up, the shoe in her hand, and stumbled back, the realization crashing into her with the weight of truth that no one else wanted to see. The dirt was fresh, not from the days before the accident, not from the playground, but from somewhere else, from sometime else, from after. She moved through the house, her mind racing, pulling open drawers, searching for anything that would help her understand, help her find what she was missing. She found Ellie's favorite stuffed rabbit, the one she had placed in the coffin with her, tucked carefully between her folded hands, now lying on the floor of Ellie's room, its fur matted with dirt. Lauren fell to her knees, clutching the toy, the scent of the earth rising up, the undeniable evidence that something was wrong, that something had happened, that the dead were not at rest. With shaken hands, Lauren called the funeral home, demanding to speak to the director, her voice breaking as she asked how the toy had returned to her house, how the shoes had fresh dirt on them, how these things could be explained. The director's voice was calm, too calm, as he explained that it was impossible, that the graves had not been disturbed, that no one had been near the coffin since the burial. He told her that grief did strange things to the mind, that perhaps she had forgotten to place the toy, that the dirt was an old stain she had not noticed. Lauren hung up, her hands trembling, her eyes staring at the toy in her lap, the dirt on her palms. She could not listen to their dismissals anymore, could not accept their explanations. She knew her children. She knew what she had done, what she had placed in their coffins, what she had buried with them. She could not ignore the evidence that screamed the truth no one else would hear. The next morning, Lauren found herself at the cemetery, standing by the graves of her husband and her children, the ground still uneven, the grass not yet grown over the fresh earth. She knelt by Ellie's grave, her hand pressing into the soil, feeling the cold, damp earth beneath her fingers, closing her eyes as tears slipped down her cheeks. She dug her fingers into the dirt, feeling it cling to her skin, letting the cold seep into her bones, grounding her in the reality of her loss, the pain that was her constant companion. She moved to Aiden's grave, her hands shaking as she pressed them into the earth, searching for something she could not name, something she hoped she would not find but needed to. As she pulled her hand back, a small object came with it, caught between her fingers. She opened her hand to find a small silver keychain, the one Aiden had kept on his backpack, a small superhero figurine attached, the paint chipped from years of use. She had placed it in his coffin, she remembered clearly, tucking it into his hand as she whispered goodbye, promising she would always be with him. Lauren fell back onto the grass, clutching the keychain to her chest, the sobs tearing from her throat, the pain too much to bear. The cemetery was empty, the silence pressing in around her, the trees swaying in the breeze, the clouds moving slowly across the sky. She sat there for what felt like hours, the weight of the keychain heavy in her hand, the truth undeniable, the questions growing louder in her mind, demanding answers that no one was willing to give. That night, she could not stay in the house. She drove to the place where the accident had happened, the stretch of road that still bore the marks of the crash, the guardrail bent, the stains on the pavement washed away by the rain, but still there in her memory. She parked the car and stepped out, the cold night air biting at her skin, the darkness pressing in around her. She walked to the spot where the car had landed, the ditch that had swallowed the vehicle, the place where her world had ended. She moved slowly, her flashlight sweeping across the grass, the light catching on small pieces of debris that still remained, a shard of glass, a scrap of metal, a torn piece of fabric. She crouched down, her hand reaching out to touch the ground, to feel the place where her children had taken their last breaths, where Joshua's voice had last called out her name, where Ellie had screamed, where Aiden had held his sister's hand. As she moved the light across the ground, it caught on something small, something that glinted in the darkness. She reached out, her fingers closing around the object, pulling it from the grass. It was a small piece of paper, crumpled and damp, the edges torn, the writing smudged but still visible. She smoothed it out, her breath catching as she read the words, written in Aiden's familiar handwriting, shaky and uneven. "Help us." Lauren fell to her knees, the paper clutched in her hands, the tears streaming down her face as she rocked back and forth, the pain tearing through her, the truth crashing into her with the weight of 1,000 storms. The words were simple, but they were enough to break her, to shatter the fragile hope she had clung to force her to see what she had tried so hard to deny. She returned home with the paper, placing it carefully in a box with the keychain, the photograph, the toy rabbit, the pieces of a puzzle she was slowly putting together, a puzzle that no one else wanted to see. She sat in the darkness of her living room, the box on the table before her, her hands shaking as she reached out to touch each item, to remind herself that she was not imagining it, that the evidence was real, that the truth was there, waiting to be uncovered. As dawn broke, the light filtering through the curtains, Lauren made a decision. She would not stop. She would not let the funeral home dismiss her, would not let the police ignore her, would not let the world move on while her children's voices cried out for justice. She would find the truth, no matter how deep she had to dig, no matter how dark the path became, no matter who tried to stop her. Lauren stood, her reflection in the window a pale shadow, her eyes dark with determination, the exhaustion of sleepless nights etched into her skin. She pressed her hand against the glass, the cold seeping into her palm, grounding her in the promise she had made to herself, to her children. She would find out what had happened. She would not let their voices be silenced. She would bring them peace. In the quiet of the morning, with the box of evidence before her and the weight of her promise heavy on her shoulders, Lauren prepared herself for the battle ahead. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a seeker of truth, a fighter for the voices that had been lost, a guardian of the memory of those she had loved more than life itself. And she would not stop until she had answers, until the truth was brought into the light, until justice was served, no matter the cost. The morning was gray, the kind of gray that seeped into the bones of the house and made every sound echo a little too sharply in the silence. Lauren sat at the kitchen table, the box of items before her, her hands resting on the surface as if she was afraid to touch them again, afraid of what they meant, what they were slowly revealing. The photograph of Ellie's hand on the glass, the dirt on Aiden's shoes, the toy rabbit that had returned to the house, the small piece of paper with Aiden's handwriting pleading for help. Each piece was a whisper of a truth no one else wanted to hear, a scream trapped beneath layers of denial and polite dismissals. She had spent the night sitting in the living room, the television off, the lights dim, the shadows in the corners of the room shifting with the movement of the trees outside the windows. Every creak of the house made her flinch. Every distant car passing on the street made her stand to look through the blinds, half expecting to see someone there, someone watching, someone who knew what she was discovering. Sleep was impossible. Not when her mind was filled with the image of Ellie's hand, with the weight of Aiden's keychain in her palm, with the words scrawled in desperate letters on the crumpled paper. When the knock came at the door, it was soft, almost hesitant, but in the silence of the house, it was as loud as a shout. Lauren stood, her legs stiff from hours of sitting, her heart pounding as she moved to the door, her hand hovering over the handle for a moment before she pulled it open. No one was there. She stepped out onto the porch, looking left and right, her eyes scanning the empty street, the quiet lawns, the stillness of the morning air. It was then that she saw the small package on the doorstep, wrapped in brown paper, no name, no return address, just her address scrawled in a hurried hand across the top. She bent to pick it up, the paper rough beneath her fingers, the weight of the package light, but heavy with the promise of something unknown. She brought it inside, placing it on the table. Her breath held as she carefully unwrapped the paper, revealing a small flash drive taped to a piece of cardboard. There was no note, no explanation, just the drive, small and unassuming, but in that moment it felt like it held the weight of the world. She stared at it, her hands trembling, her mind racing with possibilities, with fear, with the hope that it might hold the answers she needed, the proof that what she was seeing was real, that she was not losing her mind. Lauren moved to the small desk in the corner of the living room where the old laptop sat. The screen cracked at the corner from when Aiden had accidentally knocked it off the table last year. A memory that was so vivid it made her pause, her hand resting on the lid of the laptop as she closed her eyes, letting the memory wash over her before she opened it, the screen flickering to life. She inserted the flash drive, her breath caught in her throat, her hand hovering over the mouse as she clicked the folder that appeared, labeled only with the date of the accident. The video file was the only item inside, and she clicked it, the screen going black for a moment before the image appeared, shaky and dark, the quality grainy, as if it had been filmed from a distance in secret. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she watched the scene play out, the rain falling heavily, the road slick and shining under the headlights of the passing cars. Then she saw it. The crash, the moment the truck swerved, the impact, the car flipping, landing in the ditch, the rain pouring down, the smoke rising in thin tendrils into the cold air. Lauren's hand flew to her mouth as she watched, the tears welling in her eyes, her body shaken as she forced herself to watch, to see, to bear witness to the last moments of her family's life. The camera zoomed in, focusing on the wreckage, the figures moving around the car, people in reflective jackets, paramedics or what she assumed were paramedics, pulling open the doors, reaching inside. She watched, unable to look away, as one of the figures leaned into the car, reaching for something, pulling back with what looked like a small hand, limp and still, rain dripping from the figure's sleeve onto the small arm. Then it happened, so fast that she almost missed it. The small hand twitched, the fingers curling slightly, the arm moving weakly, unmistakably alive. The figure holding the arm paused, looking around, the face obscured by the hood of the rain jacket, the camera zooming in, catching the hesitation, the moment of decision. The figure leaned closer, checking for a pulse, then shaking their head, placing the arm back inside the car, stepping away, signaling to the others that there was nothing, that the child was gone. Lauren screamed, the sound tearing from her throat as she slammed her hand against the table, the laptop wobbling, the image on the screen freezing on the figure stepping back, the small hand slipping from view. She sobbed, the tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with the force of her grief, her anger, her horror. She rewound the video, forcing herself to watch again, to see every detail, to memorize the moment, to sear it into her mind so that no one could ever take it away from her. The figure in the video, the one who had checked for a pulse, was not a paramedic. Lauren could see it now. The jacket was wrong, the movements were hesitant, unpracticed, the way the figure looked around before signaling was too cautious, too deliberate. She paused the video, zooming in as much as she could, the grainy image showing the outline of the face beneath the hood, the shadow of a beard, the glint of something metallic at the collar. She grabbed her phone, taking pictures of the screen, capturing every frame, every detail, knowing that this was the proof she needed, the evidence that her children had been alive, that someone had left them to die. Lauren sat back, the images on her phone, the video still playing in the background, the rain in the video matching the tears on her face. She felt a coldness settle into her bones, a resolve hardening in her chest. She could not let this go, could not let this be another unanswered question, another moment lost to the silence of grief. She had to know who the figure was, had to know why they had left her children to die, had to know who had sent her the video, who was helping her see the truth. She called the police, her voice shaking as she explained what she had found, what she had seen, demanding that someone come and take the video, demanding that they open an investigation, that they find the person responsible. The officer on the other end of the line listened quietly, his responses calm, measured, telling her that someone would come by, that they would look into it, that she should try to get some rest. But she knew, even as she hung up the phone, that they would not come, that they would not take it seriously, that they would tell her she was mistaken, that the video was unclear, that it did not prove what she knew it proved. Lauren did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table, the laptop before her, the video playing on a loop, the images burning into her mind, the moment of hesitation, the twitch of the small hand, the decision to leave them, to walk away. She wrote down every detail she could see, every movement, every shadow, every clue that might lead her to the identity of the figure in the video. She did not notice the darkness outside turning to the pale gray of dawn, did not feel the cold of the house settling around her, did not hear the birds beginning to sing as the world woke up around her. When the knock came at the door again, it was sharp, insistent, pulling her from her focus. She stood slowly, her body aching from the hours of sitting, her mind foggy but sharp with determination. She opened the door to find two officers standing there, their faces unreadable, their eyes tired, their posture polite but distant. They asked to see the video, to come inside, to speak with her. She led them to the table, showing them the laptop. The video paused on the frame of the figure stepping back from the car, the small hand slipping from view. They watched the video, their expressions tight, their eyes flicking to each other, to her, back to the screen. When it ended, they stood in silence for a moment before one of them cleared his throat, telling her that they would take the flash drive, that they would review the footage, that they would add it to the file, that they appreciated her bringing it to their attention. Lauren tried to read their faces, to see if they understood, if they believed her, if they saw what she saw, but their expressions were carefully neutral, their words carefully chosen. When they left, taking the flash drive with them, Lauren felt a hollow emptiness settle into her chest, the fear that they would do nothing, that the evidence would disappear, that the truth would be buried again. She stood at the window, watching as they drove away, the car turning the corner, disappearing from view, leaving her alone in the silence of the house, the video now gone, the evidence now in the hands of people she did not trust to care, to see, to fight for the truth. But Lauren was not done. She had taken pictures, had written down details, had memorized the moments, and she would not stop. She would find the person in the video, would find the truth, would find justice for Ellie, for Aiden, for Joshua, no matter what it took. The secret video was not the end. It was only the beginning, the first crack in the wall of silence that had surrounded her, The first light shining through the darkness, the first step on a path that she would walk alone if she had to, for them, for the voices that had been silenced, for the love that had been taken. Lauren spent the hours after the officers left pacing the kitchen, her fingers drumming along the counter as she stared at the empty spot where the laptop had sat, the weight of its absence like a missing limb. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the video in perfect detail, the twitch of Aiden's hand, the hesitation of the man in the rain-soaked jacket, the way he looked around before walking away, leaving her son to die in the cold and the rain. Her mind replayed it on an endless loop, a film she could not pause, could not turn away from, could not forget. She had handed them the proof, handed them the truth, and now it was gone from her reach, buried in the silence of bureaucracy, hidden behind polite nods and empty promises. The house felt smaller than it ever had before, the walls pressing in around her, the shadows deeper in every corner, the silence louder than any scream. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, her fingers brushing against the surfaces, the memories of laughter and light haunting every step she took. Ellie's room was untouched, the bed still unmade, the stuffed animals lined up along the pillow, the faint scent of her daughter's shampoo clinging to the air like a whisper. Aiden's drawings were still pinned to the walls of his room, superheroes in bright colors, capes flying, eyes filled with hope, a hope that had been taken from him on a rain-soaked road while strangers decided his fate. Lauren stopped in front of the mirror in the hallway, staring at her reflection, at the hollow eyes, the pale skin, the hair pulled back into a messy knot, the face of a woman she barely recognized. She pressed her hands against the glass, leaning in close, her breath fogging the surface as she whispered to herself, a promise, a vow, a prayer that she would not let this go, that she would not stop, that she would not let their voices be silenced. She pulled away, turning from the reflection, moving with a purpose that burned through the exhaustion, the grief, the fear. She drove to the funeral home, the road a blur beneath her tires, the world outside the windows a gray smear of buildings and trees and sky. The sign out front was bright against the dull morning, the letters clean and sharp, welcoming in a way that felt like mockery. She parked the car, sitting for a moment with her hands on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the entrance, gathering the strength she needed to step inside, to face the man who had promised her peace, who had promised her that her children were gone, that they were at rest, that there was nothing more to see, nothing more to know. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of flowers and polish, the quiet heavy pressing against her ears, making every step sound too loud on the tiled floor. The funeral director looked up as she entered, his eyes widening slightly before settling back into the professional calm he wore like a uniform. She walked up to the counter, her hands resting on the edge, her eyes locking onto his, steady, unblinking, her voice clear as she told him what she needed, what she demanded, what she would not leave without. She wanted the coffins opened. The words hung in the air, sharp and cold, cutting through the silence, through the carefully maintained atmosphere of calm and respect that filled the room. The director opened his mouth, closing it again, his hands moving to straighten the papers on the counter, a nervous gesture that did not escape her notice. He told her it was not possible, that it was not necessary, that it was not allowed without a court order, without proper procedures, without the right papers, the right signatures, the right permissions. His voice was calm, soothing, practiced, but Lauren saw the flicker in his eyes, the hesitation, the fear. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She told him she would get the order, that she would get the signatures, that she would bring the papers, and that when she did, he would open the coffins. He would let her see. He would let her know the truth. She turned and walked out, the quiet of the room closing behind her, the air outside sharp against her skin as she stepped into the daylight, the promise of rain in the wind as it tangled in her hair. Lauren spent the next days in offices and hallways, filling out forms, signing papers, speaking to people who looked at her with pity, with discomfort, with the practiced sympathy of those who wanted her to go away, to stop asking questions, to stop digging into the earth of her grief, to uncover truths they did not want to see. She explained, again and again, about the video, about the dirt on Aiden's shoes, about the toy that had returned, about the hand on the glass, about the small piece of paper with a plea written in a child's hand. Some listened, some nodded, some tried to reassure her, but most looked away, their eyes sliding to the side, their hands folding the papers carefully, telling her to wait, to be patient, to let the process unfold. She did not wait. She did not stop. She called, she visited, she pressed, she insisted, and finally the papers were in her hands, the signatures at the bottom, the official stamp at the top, the weight of the law behind her as she returned to the funeral home. The papers held tightly in her hand as she stepped through the door, the director looking up, his face pale, his eyes flicking to the papers, to her face, to the floor. They arranged the exhumation for the next morning. Lauren stood at the edge of the cemetery as the workers moved, the machinery quiet but loud in the stillness, the air heavy with the scent of turned earth, the sky low and gray, the clouds hanging over the trees like a shroud. She watched as the coffins were lifted, as the soil fell away, as the workers moved with practiced care, their faces unreadable, their eyes averted, their hands steady as they placed the coffins on the ground. She stepped forward, the papers in her hand, her breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding so loudly that she could hear it in her ears, in her chest, in her skull. She nodded to the director, to the men who would open the coffins, who would break the seal between the living and the dead, who would let the truth rise from the earth. The latches were undone, the lids lifted, the air cold and still as the coffins opened, revealing the small bodies inside, the bodies she had kissed goodbye, the bodies she had mourned, the bodies she had buried. Lauren stepped forward, her hands shaking as she reached out, her eyes scanning every detail, every fold of the clothing, every line of the small faces that looked like sleep but were not sleep, that looked like peace but were not peace. She saw Ellie's hair, the curls still soft, the yellow clip still in place, the dress she had chosen, the hands folded carefully on her chest, the fingers clean, too clean, impossibly clean. She saw Aiden's face, the quiet expression, the small frown that always came when he was concentrating, the blazer she had chosen, the shirt buttoned all the way up, the small hands resting at his sides. And then she saw it. Under Aiden's fingernails, dark against the pale skin, was dirt, fresh dirt, packed into the small spaces, the kind of dirt that came from digging, from clawing, from trying to get out, from trying to fight. She reached for his hand, lifting it gently, turning it over, her breath catching as she saw the bruises on his knuckles, the small scrapes, the torn skin that had not been there when she had dressed him, that had not been there when she had kissed him goodbye, that had not been there when she had placed the small keychain in his hand. She looked at Ellie, lifting her small hand, turning it over, seeing the same dirt, the same scrapes, the same bruises, the same signs of struggle, of a fight, of a desperate attempt to escape the darkness that had been forced upon them. Her tears fell onto the small hands, onto the clothing, onto the faces of her children as she knelt there, sobbing, her body shaking, her voice breaking as she called their names, as she begged for forgiveness, as she promised them that she would not stop, that she would not let this be the end. The workers stepped back, their faces turned away, the funeral director standing in silence, his hands folded, his eyes on the ground. Lauren stood, wiping her tears, her hands dirty now with the earth of the graves, with the truth that could no longer be hidden, with the evidence that would not be denied. She turned to the funeral director, her voice steady, her eyes clear, telling him that this was not over, that this was only the beginning, that she would find out who had done this, who had left them to die, who had buried them alive. That night, Lauren sat at the kitchen table, the dirt still under her nails, the papers spread out before her, the photographs she had taken of the bruises, of the dirt, of the small hands that had fought so hard to live. She did not sleep. She planned. She wrote down every detail, every thought, every lead she could follow, every question that demanded an answer. She would take this to the media, to the police, to anyone who would listen, to anyone who could help her find the truth, to anyone who could help her bring justice for Ellie, for Aiden, for Joshua. She would not stop. She would not let them be forgotten. She would not let their voices be silenced. The exhumation had given her the proof she needed, the undeniable truth that would fuel her fight, that would drive her forward, that would give her the strength to face whatever came next. She was ready. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a warrior, armed with the truth, with the love of her children, with the unbreakable promise that she would not stop until justice was done. Lauren did not sleep after the exhumation. The images of her children's small, bruised hands and the dirt packed beneath their nails haunted her, demanding her attention even as exhaustion pressed against her mind, begging her to close her eyes. She could not. She would not. The photographs she had taken lay spread across the kitchen table, illuminated by the cold glow of the overhead light. Her hands hovered over them, fingers trembling as she traced the bruises, the cuts, the dirt that no one could deny now. She had what she needed, the evidence that proved what had happened, the evidence that would force the world to see the truth she had been screaming into the silence. The morning light found her still sitting there, the dawn cold and gray through the window, as she stood and gathered the photographs, slipping them carefully into an envelope. Her movements were methodical, controlled, a sharp contrast to the storm of grief and rage swirling in her chest. She dressed in the same clothes she had worn the day before, the dirt from the graves still clinging to the fabric, the scent of earth and something older soaked into the seams. She did not care. She wanted them to see, to smell, to feel the weight of what she carried, to know that this was not something that could be brushed aside. The drive to the police station was a blur of gray streets and red lights, the world moving around her in slow motion as her mind replayed the images over and over. Ellie's small fingers curled as if in pain, Aiden's knuckles scraped raw, the dirt that marked their desperate attempt to escape the darkness of the coffins that had become their prisons. She gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles ached, the leather pressing into her palms as she turned into the parking lot, cutting the engine and sitting in the silence for a moment before stepping out. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of stale coffee and the faint tang of cleaning supplies, the hum of conversation and the ringing of phones creating a backdrop to the sharp click of her shoes against the floor. She walked to the desk, the envelope clutched in her hand, her eyes locking onto the officer behind the counter, a young man with tired eyes and a polite smile that faltered when he saw her expression. She told him she needed to speak to the detective handling her family's case, her voice calm, clear, leaving no room for refusal. They made her wait, the minutes stretching into an hour as she sat in a plastic chair, the envelope resting in her lap, her fingers drumming softly against it as she stared at the wall, at the posters asking for help to find missing people, at the smiling faces frozen in time, waiting for someone to care enough to bring them home. She wondered how many of those faces had mothers like her, sitting in cold rooms waiting for someone to listen, for someone to help, for someone to see the truth. When they finally called her in, the detective looked up from his desk, his eyes weary, his posture slouched, the tie around his neck loosened as if it were choking him. He gestured for her to sit, his eyes flicking to the envelope in her hands before returning to her face. She placed it on the desk, sliding it towards him, her eyes never leaving his as she told him what was inside, what it meant, what she needed him to do. She explained about the exhumation, about the dirt, about the bruises, about the proof that her children had not been dead when they were buried. He opened the envelope slowly, pulling out the photographs, flipping through them with careful hands, his eyes narrowing as he examined each image, the silence stretching between them like a rope pulled taut. When he finished, he placed them back into the envelope, folding his hands over it, his eyes meeting hers with a softness that made her chest tighten. He told her he would look into it, that he would add it to the file, that he would see what he could do. The words were gentle, measured, the same words she had heard before, the words that meant nothing, that were meant to soothe, to pacify, to make her go away. Lauren leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the desk, her voice low, steady, telling him that she would not go away, that she would not stop, that she would not let them ignore this, that she would take it to the media if she had to, that she would stand on the steps of the courthouse with the photographs and the truth if they would not help her. The detective's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing his face before he nodded, promising again, softer this time as if he understood, as if he believed her, as if he cared. She left the station with the promise hanging in the air behind her, empty or not. It did not matter. She would not wait for them. She would not let the investigation be buried under paperwork and polite words. She would make them see. She would make them act. She drove to the local news station, the building familiar from years of seeing it on television, the faces of the anchors smiling from the screens, the voices that filled the living rooms of homes like hers every evening. She parked and walked inside, the envelope in her hand, the dirt still under her nails, the determination burning in her chest. She asked to speak to a reporter, anyone who would listen, her voice clear, unshakable, as she explained what she had, what she needed them to see. They made her wait again, the minutes dragging, the cold air of the lobby pressing against her skin as she sat with the envelope in her lap, her fingers tracing the edges, her mind focused, sharp, ready. When a young reporter came to greet her, his eyes curious, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, she stood, meeting his gaze, seeing the hesitation, the uncertainty, the curiosity. They sat in a small office, the door closed, the hum of the building muffled by the walls as she placed the photographs on the table, spreading them out, explaining each one, her voice calm, controlled, as she told him what had happened, what she had found, what she had seen in the video, what the exhumation had revealed. The reporter listened, his eyes moving from her face to the photographs, his hands hovering over them as if afraid to touch them, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock to something else, something like anger. He told her he would take the story, that he would speak to his editor, that they would run it, that people needed to see, needed to know, that the truth could not be hidden. She watched as he gathered the photographs, as he took notes, as he asked her questions, her answers clear, precise, each word a blade cutting through the silence, each sentence a promise that she would not let this go. When she left the building, the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of red and orange, the promise of night coming with the cold air that brushed against her face. That night, she sat in the living room, the television on, the volume low as she waited, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the screen. When the segment came on, the images of her children's hands, the bruises, the dirt, the photographs she had taken, the reporter's voice telling their story, her story, the truth, she felt the tears slip down her cheeks, silent, steady, a release of the pressure that had built inside her for so long. She watched as the camera panned over the cemetery, over the graves, over the place where the truth had been buried, now brought into the light. The phone rang. It was her sister, her voice shaking as she told Lauren she had seen it, that she was proud of her, that she believed her, that she loved her. Another call came, a neighbor, then another, people she knew, people she didn't, their voices filled with sympathy, with support, with the promise that they were with her, that she was not alone. But amidst the calls of support came another, the voice on the other end, low, controlled, familiar from the calls she had received before, telling her she had made a mistake, that she needed to stop, that she needed to let it go if she wanted to keep her family safe. Lauren felt the fear rise in her chest, cold and sharp, but it did not stop her. It fueled her, hardened her resolve, strengthened her promise to her children, to herself, that she would not stop, that she would not let them be silenced, that she would not let their deaths be ignored, hidden, explained away with polite words and empty promises. She would find out who had done this, who had left them to die, who had buried them alive, who was trying to silence her now. The night was dark and quiet around the house, the air cold against the windows, the shadows deep in the corners of the rooms as Lauren moved through them, checking the locks, peeking through the blinds, her eyes sharp, her mind alert, ready. She would not be afraid. She would not stop. She was ready for whatever came next, ready to face the darkness, ready to fight for the truth, for Ellie, for Aiden, for Joshua, for herself. The race for the truth was not over. It had only just begun. Lauren had never known that silence could have so many layers. It was in the hum of the refrigerator late at night, in the ticking of the clock on the living room wall, in the groan of the floorboards as she moved from window to window, checking each lock, each curtain, peering out into the darkness for headlights that didn't belong, for figures that shouldn't be there. It was in the way the shadows gathered in the corners of the house, pressing in as if the walls themselves were trying to whisper something to her, trying to warn her. After the story aired on the news, that silence grew teeth, sharp and cold, turning every creak into a threat, every breeze against the window into a warning. She had expected that the story would bring movement, that the police would call, that the detective would say there was progress, that the funeral home would reach out with apologies or explanations, that someone, somewhere, would tell her that justice was coming. Instead, the world outside her windows remained quiet. The only calls she received were from people she had never met, strangers telling her they believed her, that they prayed for her, that they too had lost someone and knew how the world could turn its face away from truth. And then there were the other calls, the ones with no caller ID, the ones that came in the middle of the night, the voice on the other end low, almost calm, reminding her that she was making mistakes, that she was putting herself and her family in danger, that she should let it go. Lauren did not let it go. She found herself drawn to the cemetery late at night, sitting in her car with the engine off, the cold creeping in through the seams of the windows as she stared at the small plots where Ellie and Aiden and Joshua lay, the dirt mounded and settled, the grass beginning to take root around the edges. She would sit there for hours, the darkness pressing in, the moonlight silvering the gravestones, her breath fogging the window as she watched, waiting, as if the earth itself would rise up and give her the answers she needed, as if she could will the truth into the light with the force of her presence. It was on one of those nights, the sky a deep, endless black above her, that she saw the headlights. They were distant at first, a pair of small, floating lights moving along the road, turning into the cemetery driveway, cutting across the grass as the car moved slowly, carefully, as if the driver was trying not to be seen. Lauren sank lower in her seat, her eyes fixed on the vehicle as it came to a stop a few rows away from the graves, the headlights cutting out, leaving only the glow of the dome light inside as a figure stepped out, the light glinting off something metallic before the door closed, plunging the area back into darkness. She could not see the figure's face, but she could see the outline, the way the person moved, cautious, looking around before walking toward the graves, stopping by the spot where Aiden and Ellie lay. Lauren's heart pounded, her breath quickening as she reached for her phone, snapping a photo, the flash off. The screen dimmed as she captured the grainy image of the figure standing over the graves, head bowed, shoulders hunched. She watched as the person knelt, as if placing something on the ground, as if whispering something into the dirt before standing again, looking around one last time before returning to the car and driving away, the headlights off until the vehicle was back on the road. Lauren waited until the taillights disappeared down the road before she stepped out of her car, the cold air biting into her skin as she walked to the spot where the figure had stood, her breath clouding the air as she knelt, her hands brushing over the ground until she felt it, small and cold and metallic, half buried in the dirt. She pulled it out, holding it up to the moonlight, her breath catching in her throat as she realized what it was. It was a paramedic's badge, scratched and worn, the name faded, the number partially ground away, but it was there, undeniable, heavy in her hand as she stood in the darkness, clutching it to her chest. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table, the badge on the table before her, the photographs of her children's hands spread around it, the image on her phone of the figure in the cemetery glowing softly in the dark room. She traced the edges of the badge with her finger, remembering the man in the video, the hesitation, the way he had checked for a pulse before shaking his head and walking away, leaving Aiden to die. She remembered the figure's size, the build, the way the shoulders moved, and she felt it in her bones, the certainty, the recognition, the truth she could no longer deny. In the morning, she returned to the funeral home. The director looked up when she entered, his eyes flickering to the badge in her hand, the photographs in the other, his face draining of color as she walked toward him, each step deliberate, controlled, the silence between them heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. She placed the badge on the counter, spreading the photographs out around it, her eyes never leaving his as she told him what she knew, what she had seen, what she had discovered, her voice calm, unshakable, each word a stone thrown into the silence. He denied it, of course. His voice was smooth, practiced, but there was a tremor there, a crack in the armor as she pressed him, as she asked him why the badge had been at the gravesite, why the man in the video moved like him, why the children had been buried alive. His hands shook as he reached for the badge, pulling it toward him, trying to tuck it away, but Lauren's hand shot out, pinning it to the counter, her eyes locked onto his, her voice low as she told him she was going to the police, to the media, to anyone who would listen, that this was over, that she would not let him hide behind his lies any longer. The funeral director's eyes shifted, something dark passing through them before he looked away, his shoulders slumping as he told her it was an accident, that he didn't know, that he had just followed instructions, that there were people who wanted it done, who paid him, who told him what to do. Lauren's breath caught, the words hanging in the air between them, the truth breaking open like a wound as she realized that it had never been about a mistake, that there had been intent, that there had been orders, that her children's lives had been traded for something she did not yet understand. She left the funeral home with the badge in her pocket, the photographs tucked into her bag, her mind racing as she drove to the police station, her hands gripping the wheel, her eyes scanning the mirrors for the car she was sure would be following her now. She stepped into the station, walking straight to the detective's office, laying the badge on his desk, spreading the photographs around it, her voice clear, calm, controlled as she told him everything, every detail, every discovery, every piece of evidence she had gathered. The detective listened, his eyes moving over the photographs, the badge, the notes she had made, the images on her phone, his face tightening as he realized the depth of what she had brought him, the undeniable truth in the images, the evidence of a crime that could no longer be ignored. He stood, telling her he would take it to his superior, that there would be an investigation, that they would bring in the funeral director for questioning, that they would find out who was behind it, who had given the orders, who had decided that Ellie and Aiden's lives were expendable. Lauren left the station with the weight of the truth pressing down on her, but it was a different weight now, a weight that came with the knowledge that the silence was breaking, that the darkness was being pushed back, that the truth was coming into the light. She returned home, sitting in the living room, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, warming her skin as she closed her eyes, allowing herself, for the first time in what felt like forever, to rest just for a moment, to let the exhaustion pull her under. That night, she stood at the window, looking out at the quiet street, the shadows deep, the darkness thick, but she was not afraid. She had the truth now, and with it came a strength she did not know she possessed, a resolve that would not bend, would not break, would not be silenced. She thought of Ellie's laughter, of Aiden's quiet smile, of Joshua's warm, steady presence, and she felt them with her, around her, in her, their voices no longer silenced, their spirits no longer trapped in the darkness. The final confrontation had begun, and Lauren was ready. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and check out our other videos to keep the stories alive. Thank you for watching.